This episode of There's No A in Creemee has been sponsored by Phoenix Books. Every click has a cost. In the time it takes to hear this, Vermonters will send over $1,000 to Amazon, a company built on exploiting workers and squeezing small businesses. In times like these, our sponsor Phoenix Books wants to remind Vermonters to support Main Street over Wall Street this holiday season. Shop local. Shop your values.
One of the greatest tricks that's sort of been played on our societies to present the economy as some abstract force out there beyond our control, when the reality is that we are the economy. It's just a word for the way we produce and provide for one another. The Wellbeing Economy movement, it starts from the premise that it's not about economic growth. It's really about the flourishing and the quality of life for people and our planet. People have lost faith in democracy because we view our governments as just henchmen of private sector interest. Then let's revitalize town meeting and engage more deliberative processes at all levels of government.
Hello, Vermont. I'm Andy Janoo.
And I'm Joanna Grossman.
And this is There's No A in Creemee.
Vermont politics, culture, and beyond.
Thanks for joining us.
Hello, and welcome to There's No A in Creemee, episode 17.
Episode 17 of season 2.
Yeah, of season 2. Thank you for that. Yep. That is a large number for the second season already.
Yeah.
We've
been doing good work.
Yeah. I really can't believe it.
No.
That's crazy.
It's not true.
It is true.
Oh.
We would never tell you guys something that isn't true.
Well, we have a spreadsheet, and we're not just making up numbers.
We are not.
We incremented the episodes correctly. This is 17 with Amanda Janoo.
With Amanda Janoo, my emerged sister.
Seriously cool conversation.
Amazing. She works for the Wellbeing Alliance. She is a brilliant economist. She talks with us all about the wellbeing economy and sort of a different picture of how we could do things.
Yeah.
It was really inspiring.
Maybe the smartest person in Vermont right now.
I mean, she's just brilliant.
Yeah.
The first time I met her, I was like, oh my God. And she's brilliant and she's inspiring and she's fun. And we're really excited to bring this episode to you.
Absolutely. She dealt with our dopey questions like a pro.
She really did. Yeah.
Enjoy.
She is great. Yeah, enjoy. Hello and welcome to There's No A in Creemee. Amanda Janoo, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
I just have to say, I want you to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your organization. But also, Amanda and I were emerged sisters, and we go back, and I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm really excited to be here, too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Tell us a little about your job and your role and how that involves Vermont.
Well, so I grew up in Vermont, so in South Stratford, Vermont, which is in the Upper Valley area. And growing up, I would go to the town meeting with my parents, and so watch my neighbors and community discuss and debate and decide on everything from how much money should go to the roads, to the schools, to whether or not there should be GMO labeling.
How much salt to buy.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We covered that a little in the first episode. I love that you're calling back to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that was really my introduction to politics and my introduction to economics. So when I actually went to college, I learned that there were a bunch of people who believed that the economy was governed by its own natural laws and not by us. I was horrified. And so that sort of started my now, I would say, decades-long love-hate relationship with economics, because I feel like one of the greatest tricks that's sort of been played on our societies to present the economy as some abstract force out there beyond our control, when the reality is that we are the economy. It's just a word for the way we produce and provide for one another. And so I feel very strongly about the idea that we should therefore have a right and a responsibility to mold and direct that system in line with our values and objectives. So that led me to work for quite a while for the UN as an industrial policy expert, which was at that moment kind of like the last bastion against neoliberalism. So it's the idea that government should take a proactive approach in protecting and promoting particular economic activities in line with their goals. And so one of the things in working in that space that was the most important was to understand what their actual goal was. And so in Myanmar, for example, was the first Ministry of Economy I worked with that was majority women. And their goal was about rural-urban inequality reduction. And if that's your goal, then you don't want to just attract big multinational corporations who know how to consolidate wealth better than anyone. And you probably want to focus more on supporting like rural cooperatives or informal firms that are going to support more equitable and broad-based development. Or in Mozambique, it was about resiliency. And so rather than taking a very, just export-oriented raw material focus, you focus on supporting a diversity of local industries so that you have, a really vibrant local economy. And so that realization of how important it is to understand like the higher level development goal led me to work for the organization I work for now, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is really focused on fundamentally redefining our definition of progress and development away from economic growth to really center social and ecological well-being so that then we can appropriately design and evaluate our economies by its contribution to that.
Well, let's dig into that well-being economy, that term. That may not be one that a lot of people are familiar with. So what is that specifically, and how does it compare to what we consider the traditional economy to be?
Yeah. So, maybe it's helpful to also demystify some of the kind of like dominant economic logic or understanding of the economy we've had since the 80s, which has been very much centered in sort of a trickle-down economics narrative in the sense that the understanding is the primary goal of government and society is to boost economic growth. And so the best way to do that is to support the large corporations, investors, tech entrepreneurs, and to remove them from any democratic oversight and just trust that if they're left to their own devices, the wealth and profit they generate will benefit us all through increased investment and job creation and cheaper goods. But even at the time in the 80s when Reagan was trying to advance this, economists were like, there's no basis for this in reality, because that's unfortunately not how economies work. It just will lead to greater consolidation of power and wealth into fewer and fewer hands, which leads to greater corruption and political influence, et cetera. And so the well-being economy movement, it starts from the premise that it's not about economic growth. It's really about the flourishing and the quality of life for people and our planet. And if that is our orientation point, or let's say in Vermont, similarly, when you ask people what they love about living here, they always say it's the community, like neighbors, helping neighbors, and it's our natural beauty. And so if that is the things that we appreciate the most, rather than taking it as like for granted as something that's here, it becomes actually the orientation point for then designing or evaluating our economy's success. And so at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, for us, it's really important that that definition of progress is developed by communities, so it's in their own language and values. But we say, it's around ensuring that the economy actually delivers on the things we need most, like ensuring that everybody has the necessary foundations to live a life of dignity and purpose, of ensuring fairness so that there's a just distribution of not only like wealth and income, but also power and time, of fostering meaningful connections, like meaningful relationships, not only between people, but also the natural environment, and of ensuring first and foremost that our economy is not only protecting, but regenerating our natural environment, like giving back as much as it takes. Right. And last, but probably not least, because this is the one I'm like particularly passionate about, is the importance of participation, of us feeling like we have the power and voice to mold and direct this system in line with our values and objectives.
So it is still toward growth. It's just a different definition of growth. It looks more at the individual level.
Well, and that's the thing. Even the guy, Simon Kuznets, who was one of the chief architects of the system of national accounts, which is like the basis of GDP, he was really clear that any discussion of growth should always be growth of what and why. Right? And so that has to always be the question, like, what do we want to grow and why do we want to grow it? And so, for example, right now in Vermont, I think there's a really strong case for example, having more primary care physicians in our state, right? Or of really supporting and protecting our local businesses and our supporting our sole proprietors. And so it really depends on what your goals are,
Sure.
but not assuming that if you just encourage more external big corporations or investment, that's going to be the route to your prosperity.
Gotcha.
I love how the model is a lot of playing to our strengths, right? And thinking about what are we good at, what do we value, and kind of bringing that to the forefront. Can you talk to us a little about what are the metrics? Like, how do you measure success?
Yeah. So I will say in this work, because a lot of it does start, like people come, I think, to the wellbeing economy movement with that question. Because if it's not GDP, then how do you measure it? And I will say everybody and their mother has their alternative to GDP metrics.
Oh, okay.
So I've had to be a bit agnostic in terms of it. And so there are many
Sure.
different examples. Like one, for example, is called the Happy Planet Index. And it just looks at like people's life satisfaction per unit of material consumption, right? And like that's pretty simple, but it's something which the countries which rank highest in terms of that end up being countries like Costa Rica, right? Like not like the United States. So because the US, in terms of GDP, like we're by far the richest country in history, but 60% of Americans aren't earning enough to afford basic needs like healthcare, housing, or food. And so in what ways can you say that that's a functioning or flourishing economy? But there are like a wide variety of them. And I think the point is it's less about the metrics as like what is the accountability to those metrics as well. I think one of my favorite examples, like the organization I worked with, we helped to create the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, which is a coalition of 6 governments that all committed to developing alternative indicators of progress, but also of transforming their governance and economic systems in line with that. And Wales was one of those who went through a process of asking all of their citizens, what kind of Wales do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? And on that basis...
That prompt really snaps into focus, too. I just have to say, I really love that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially thinking about future generations, there's something that unlocks some of our imagination as well to move from just being immediately reactive to everything to having a clear plan or vision. And so through that process, they developed these 7 high-level well-being goals, which were around equity, health, global responsibility, connection, biodiversity, which is their definition of resilience, and even their definition of prosperity was an innovative, creative, and productive society, but that respected planetary boundaries. And so then they passed the legislation that required a total transformation of the whole of government to not only develop indicators to measure this, which the indicators I think are good because they always wanted to choose indicators that would relate to multiple goals, not just one, but to set clear 25-year targets, so for the next generation, and to hold the whole of government to account to achieving them by creating a Future Generations Commissioner whose tenure is always longer than any political administration or cycle, who's semi-autonomous. And so what that meant was that, for example, when they wanted to build a new highway through the country, the Future Generations Commission was like, cool, all right, well, explain to me how that's going to contribute to our 7 well-being goals. And when they couldn't make the case for it contributing to any of the goals, except for maybe one, they put an entire permanent freeze on all new highway development and road development. So all that money would go into public transportation and active travel instead, which they could see as directly contributing to a healthier, more equitable, globally responsible, et cetera, Wales. And so it becomes an orientation point for making decisions in a different way than I think we're making them right now.
So I imagine you must have to bridge a lot of gaps. So when you are talking to economists about these things, they are probably reluctant to break away from GDP or job growth or these traditional metrics. And then at the same time, when you're talking to people who are working for social progress, they're probably distrustful of economists. How do you bridge that gap and bridge those two worlds so you can talk to both of them?
Yeah. I mean, I love that question because honestly, economists are often, or at least traditionally trained, what we would call like neoclassical economists, are probably the hardest ones.
Adam Smith model. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Are the hardest ones to maybe get it like aligned with this kind of thinking because there's already so much internalization of a particular worldview or logic. I think for most people, it's it just intuitively makes sense. But it is somewhat, there's like both a learning and an unlearning that happens because we've all held this economic supremacy for so long that we feel the need to make the case for why like health is good for the economy rather than feeling like we can swap that burden of proof and ask like, how is the economy contributing to our health? But that's really the kind of paradigm shift, which, we're trying to advance.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
It is. This is, I just am listening to you and thinking, I feel like I'm just overwhelmed by how would we ever make that shift, right? How can we teach people that you can buy into a different model without causing harm to your community? I deal so much with the idea that people think that investing in, these big corporate models is the only way to go. That's the only indicator of growth. And it's like, so I guess I'm curious, like, how do you build buy-in in a whole country? Like, how did these countries do that? How did these 6 governments, you said?
Yeah.
How did they do that?
I mean, I will say that the first 3 governments that started it were all had female heads of state, which I don't think is a coincidence. It was, it was New Zealand, Iceland, and Scotland that started it. And then now there's Canada, Wales, Finland, and Ireland and Brazil are going to join soon. But I think a lot of it is just that we don't really have a choice, honestly. Like the current system, they just realized we're achieving economic growth. Like we've designed systems that are really good at that. But we are also seeing extreme inequality, extreme environmental degradation, and even the richest countries in the world can no longer afford to just keep reacting to the increasing severity and frequency of these like social or political or environmental crises. And so they're going to have to move upstream and get the economy to do a bit more of the heavy lifting in terms of delivering on more equitable and like sustainable outcomes. And so it's like in Vermont, the way that we're going about it, I'm part of a coalition, which was called the Vermont Prosperity Project, but we're now rebranding to be WEAVE, and which stands for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Vermont. And it includes, the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, VCRD, the Vermont Council for Rural Development, the Gund Institute, so the Ecological Economists, and UVM, Abundant Sun, and we're expanding our steering committee now. But a lot of it is actually going out and engaging community and asking similar kinds of questions about like, what is your vision for the future of Vermont? Like, what do you really value most? And then actually documenting examples of where they see economic activities or behaviors that are already aligned with those values or that vision. So if we talk about, social connection, there are a lot of examples of the ways that we show up for one another in non-monetary sort of ways to take care, to provide, or to look after one another, the natural environment. And once you see these examples or all of our many, small businesses and cooperatives and social enterprises or Bar Hill Distillery, I love as an example of a business that has really embraced this idea of being like a circular and regenerative business. And so it starts to feel like something that isn't like a total massive transformation, but the pieces are already here, but they all exist in spite of the system rather than because of the system. Sure. And so how do we ensure that they can thrive because we recognize the value that they're providing beyond just like a financial, immediate monetary one?
Yeah.
I was watching an interview of yours, and you were talking about, and I might botch this concept, but that the economy sometimes damages something, and then we have to find, or let's take the environment for an example. We've got an economy that damages the environment, and then we tack fees on to utility bills, or we fine people, or we raise taxes to clean it up. And that's an example of a failed system, or a comprehensive system would work us towards the goal of having a clean environment. Maybe taking a local example, if Vermont has to meet carbon emissions, how could it attack that in a way that is in spirit of the well-being economy?
But yeah, I mean, and this is really, I think, probably the like trickiest widget.
Sure.
Yeah, because it really gets to
We
the
ask the tough
fundamental
questions.
issues of the welfare state itself.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like, I think some of the eloquence of GDP is that it's not only a proxy for economic output, but it's also a proxy for national income. So whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, like you like the idea of using that as an orientation point because it'll tell you how much you can potentially try to get back through taxes to fix any of the damages done through that process of growth, right? And so this, so much of our efforts end up being to just like put out the fires that are created by this system rather than moving upstream and preventing them from happening in the first place. And so in some ways, this is where it like breaks from some of the traditional left-right divide, where it's not so much about, no government or all government, but really about like how do you intentionally use policy, both regulations, but also incentives and disincentives, as well as information and public ownership to actually build economic systems, let's say for the example of carbon emissions, that are more sustainable by design. So in Vermont, let's say we already have, building on the strengths-based approach you were saying, this sort of love of people living off the grid, and having a lot of self-sufficiency in terms of their energy production. I think there would be a huge amount of appeal within our communities to have much more localized kind of grids and much more self-sufficient grids that are not embedded within these much larger, energy pipelines. And so, like, my mom lives up in Burke, for example, and when they built the wind turbines, they were like, this is horrible. And it's also, most of that energy just goes straight to Massachusetts anyway. So that they, it's like not only a blight, but it's not supporting that self-sufficiency in some way. And so much of this is
so they don't feel ownership over it.
Yeah. And so how do you relocalize, I think, a lot of this decision-making and also provide people to have more power over ensuring that they have the goods and services that are most necessary as close as
it's
possible.
an interesting metaphor, really, for what's going on in education policy. Think about it, right? Because we're taking it out of the local community, and that's where the problems are popping up. Well, something that I'm thinking a lot about, in my fight in my day job against Amazon and trying to support local businesses is trying to make the case that it's the state's responsibility to be supporting Vermont businesses and the Vermont economy. And there is this sort of concept out there that in this economic system, we don't pick winners and losers. And I'm kind of like, well, maybe we should support our community first and foremost. And one of the things that you said right up at the top is of course, Vermonters value our community. So let's value our community. That's getting in my bully pulpit here. But I guess what I'm asking you, and I hope I didn't lead the witness too much, but I guess I'm curious, so what role should government play in guiding economic policy? How do we pick? Yeah.
And so this has been the amazing thing because, when I used to work in industrial policy, which is all about picking, winners, as they say, I worked at the UN's Industrial Development Organization, which was like the redheaded stepchild of the UN system. And like Stiglitz said when he was working at the World Bank, industrial policy was a 4-letter word. But now it's all back the rage. And so there's a lot more recognition of the need to strategically protect and promote particular kinds of economic activities in order to have really flourishing. And again, it depends on what our goals are. I think in Vermont, you notice that even when I was in Portland recently, I was like, it's so amazing. You walk down the street and it's all small local businesses.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a bunch of chains or national, big corporations. And there's something really beautiful, not only in terms of the resilience of that system, because the local businesses are not going to flee, right? They're invested in this community for many more reasons than just because it's a convenient location to connect to consumers. And it provides a cultural richness, which I think is very valuable and important as well. And so Of course, yes. I've always been somebody who believes very strongly in the importance of government taking a role in protecting and promoting their own domestic or localized industries or businesses. Because ultimately as well, the big multinationals, as soon as you buy something from them, that money leaves our community immediately. So there's none of the multiplier effects of keeping that money circulating within our local economy, which is also really important.
So with the federal government pulling back a lot of the funding, it's a challenge for Vermont, but it may also be an opportunity to consider how we structure our economy. What can Vermont legislators do as they think about solving these problems to build an economy that supports small business, that supports community, that supports our workers and individuals?
Yeah. I mean, I love how you say that. Yes, every crisis is also an opportunity. And I don't know that we're always,
I'm reading the obstacles of the way, so
yeah,
that's
there are
like first and
obstacles.
foremost.
I mean, so I'm also part of a coalition called Fund Vermont's Future, which is a really awesome kind of coalition of a lot of folks you wouldn't expect, like the ACLU and the teachers union and like public assets, et cetera, but been really looking over for multiple years about reforming the Vermont tax structure in order to be not only more equitable, but to ensure sufficient revenue, so sort of anti-austerity. And so through that process, I am very acutely aware of the threats, because about 30% of our budget comes from the federal government. But pretty much the majority of that goes into our incredibly broken medical care system, right? And so what this crisis, I think, provides us an opportunity, because even before they threaten to cut it, or even before, the big, beautiful bill comes into effect, our system is already clearly broken, right? I mean, I was talking to my friend who's a bartender, and his insurance went from about $100 to $1,000 a month, right? Yep. And I mean, who can afford this? And so I think it's a clear indication that there are certain kinds of things like healthcare that you do not want to be oriented to profit. That's a very perverse incentive, because if all of us are paying for a medical care system, then the incentive is for us to be healthy. But if you have a fee-for-service or profit-oriented system, then the incentive is shifted. And so I was looking at, for example, if we passed the Fund Vermont's Future has been trying to pass a fair share, they call proposal, which is to put a surcharge on income which is above $500,000 each year. So you get, rich Vermonters to pay more of their fair share. And if we just pass that, we would have more than enough money to be able to just pay primary care physicians directly the average annual salary that they're already having. People could go and get free healthcare without having to deal with insurance, and you could still cover free basic pharmaceuticals. Like small towns, we could get small town doctors back so they could provide like welcome packages if they have a empty, building or something, that you could set up clinics. We could cover admin support and even like some practitioners to support with this. But the best preventative care is going to come from practitioners who are embedded within our community. So coming back to the idea that like if our orientation point and the thing we love is the strength of our communities, then let's bring back doctors into those. And let's just create a side system that would ultimately end up saving us, upwards of like $250 million a year, right? Just for more of that upstream preventative expenditure. And then we could deal with all of the other stuff, which is engaged with like the ACA and, a lot of the larger regulations to figure out a way to get to like a full universal healthcare program. But yeah, fulfill the need. We could do it.
Well, I think you might have answered this a little bit, but so something that we're talking about here and we're talking about constantly is that, so Vermont is a brave little state, but we're not a rich little state, right? Mm-hmm. And we've been kind of being able to, pursue our values here as a state, as far as we've been able to, by being kept afloat by federal funds in a lot of ways, both to the state government, grants, tons of grants to small businesses, and also to the nonprofit sector, which is a huge employer here. And, without that money now, what I'm trying to figure out is, how are we going to keep Vermont solvent in this environment? And how are we going to be able to continue to be Vermont with Vermont values and not just like a shell of Vermont, when we've got an authoritarian regime rising, and I know that's fighting words, but that's how I'm seeing it. In this environment. So how are we going to be able to move forward in this moment? And by this moment, I mean like in this spring session when they have to write the budget.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it brings me back, I guess, to my experience working in international development too, where that was always the logic too, right? Like these countries are poor because there's a very like deficit-oriented mindset. Like they don't have the foundations they need. So we just need to look for external foreign direct investment, technology, skills. Like that is what's going to
Sounds familiar.
like, be the root of their development and prosperity. But the reality is like, I always like, let's start with what do you have, right? Like what are the things that you have here that are the foundation of the kind of goals that you want to advance? And so yes, 100%. There is a lot that is broken within our federal and our state sort of like social welfare and like governance and decision-making processes. Like currently we're just like reacting to stuff and we need to be a lot more proactive because I don't think saying it's authoritarianism is fighting words. Like it's straight up fascism, man. Like 100%. Like the reason I moved back to the U.S. is because my dad is an immigrant and I know that the standard fascist playbook is always to scapegoat immigrants and the most vulnerable in our population for the pain that is brought by like total free market globalization, right? Like, because it's easier to blame an immigrant than it is a multinational corporation. But I think most people recognize that that's sort of what's happening here. And so I think it's important to realize that especially now, to your point, if we want to live with our values, we've all got to be aggressively generous, right? And that does require that those who have more financial resources to be more generous with those. But it doesn't also put everybody else off the hook too. Because I think the thing that makes Vermont so special is like we're handy. We know how to like build shit and fix shit and do things, And so the thing is, I truly believe we have everything we need. But the issue is that whether or not we are willing to actually like step up and lean in and to ensure that like the basic foundations are there because like Trump will threaten to cut our funding, right? In order to make us capitulate. And so we need to be very clear that there's no price at which we're willing to like sell our neighbors to ICE, right? And that we will ensure that we have the basic needs of food and housing and healthcare because those kind of vulnerabilities are what they will leverage on in order to force our compliance. And I think we, more than maybe anywhere else, I'm obviously biased because I love Vermont, right? I think we do have the strength of those values to not only ensure that we take care of our own, but actually push back against the federal government. Because at this point, my only hope is states' rights. Like our federalist structure, the promise of it was that it would be a bulwark against authoritarianism and that states would be living laboratories of democracy. And so if people have lost faith in democracy because we view our governments as just henchmen of private sector interest, then let's revitalize town meeting and engage more deliberative processes at all levels of government so we can be clear that it's people, not presidents, set the agenda, right? And that we can determine what are our priority goals and how do we want to allocate resources to align with those and to just take care of one another. I think in this time when a lot of people want to put their head down and pretend like it's not happening, but unfortunately that's just not how fascism works.
Yeah.
I've lived in Vermont most of my life, but I've lived elsewhere, and I would say those places had similar resiliency at the local level, and it just makes me wonder with the authoritarianism. I think we sometimes look to that kind of strong man in desperation for a solution, but we don't like what we get because, as we talked about, the good stuff comes locally from the small independent economies, the ones that sponsor our little league teams, the one who drop everything when we have a pandemic and make sure that their store is accessible, the ones who open up extra lines for when SNAP benefits disappear. It just makes me think that authoritarianism runs against what we really do want. If we stop and we think about it, it's not going to produce the kind of economy and society that we want.
Yeah. No, that's really beautifully said. I
Well, thank you.
love that.
I'm just
I love
spitballing
that. Yeah. And Benito Mussolini once said that fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of corporate and state power. And I think that's what we really need to keep our eye on right now, because what is terrifying me is the sort of collusion between not only sort of like white Christian nationalist fascist militarization, but also this like techno crypto libertarian thing that's happening simultaneously.
Like the Amazon sponsored ballroom in the White House. It's
100%.
crazy.
And so this is where, I mean, any state that believes in states' rights, I think we should really come together in this moment and create more proactive coalitions. Because if you even had 3 states, or I mean even one significant like, California or New York, that threatened to divest from all of the companies that are funding the ballroom, you would absolutely undermine so much of the money that is going to keep this authoritarian regime like in power. And I think that's a lot of what we need to figure out now too, is like, how do we work with other states to ensure digital sovereignty in our own like networks? How do we ensure food security, energy, sovereignty? Because they will take advantage of any kind of vulnerable supply chain to cut us off if we won't be complicit, right?
Oh, yeah, they already are. I mean, I felt like, cutting SNAP benefits was like starving their own citizens to get what they wanted. I mean, that to me was, it was outright collective punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that is scary to me, I guess, because it is like they're testing our level of dehumanization, like how much dehumanization we'll be okay with. It's like we'll start with the immigrants and then the homeless people, right? And like we'll just keep going and seeing how far. Because that's the other thing we sometimes forget. At the beginning of this year, I was reading a lot about the rise of fascism in Europe in the 20th century, is that they promised security and socialism for a particular section of the population, right? And so I think that's where being clear that everybody who is here is a Vermonter and we will protect and take care of one another no matter what is a very important notion, and to not fall into a lot of the polarization and othering, which is easy in moments of fear to get wrapped up in.
I love that you called that. We had an episode early in the series that was all about what's the term real Vermonter and what's a real Vermonter. And we basically came around to our shared values and identifying with Vermont, with wanting to be here. And I couldn't agree more with that.
Was your first interest having a positive social impact, or was it economics? Which one was first?
Oh,
and which
I
one?
mean, definitely having a positive social impact.
And so how did you come to the conclusion that economics could be a vehicle for achieving that?
I mean, I think for me, I've always sort of seen the world as this Venn diagram with all of these various interconnected but overlapping parts, and saw all these different, political and social and environmental and cultural issues. I felt like somewhere towards the center sat the economy, right? And so the way that we produce and provide for one another. And like if you change that system, then I think it ripples out and changes so many other aspects as well. And so I think it just seemed like a lot of the root cause of not only our problems, but I think also of our like collective liberation can be found in thinking about our economy in a different way and feeling like we have power over it. Right. And so that's a lot of my passion, is just demystifying it and trying to get people to feel less intimidated to have an opinion and to feel like we can intervene.
That's great. I ended up in my current role because I ran for legislature and I was unsuccessful. And then I happened to notice this festival that was going on that was uniting the community, and the businesses were coming together and putting it on. And when this came up, I thought, maybe there's a really positive role for the economy to play in bringing us all together and building a better community. Yes. And it's great.
100%. I mean, that's one of the things that's been fascinating for me recently. I think because we're called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, I get a lot of interest from public health folks, and particularly because of the epidemic of loneliness. And so this rising isolation and feelings of disconnection, understanding the connection between our economy and the ways in which it's currently designed to isolate us, right? Like it profits off of our isolation and really benefits from that. Yep. But to your point, it can also play an incredible role in fostering social connection, not only through local businesses, but I think once you expand the definition of the economy from being beyond just business and finance to the way we produce and provide for one another, you also can see a lot of the ways that we provide for one another non-monetarily. And so the research on the epidemic of loneliness is pretty new, but one of the most effective antidotes they found so far is volunteering, which makes so much sense to me because there was this study that looked at the power of gift giving. Yes. So when you give a gift to somebody else, it boosts your immune system, it reduces your stress levels, and it reinforces social trust. And so every time we give to other people, it actually makes us trust them more, which is counterintuitive within our existing culture, but it's a big part of it. Like that is how you foster social connection and trust, is through these small moments of generosity with one another that I think is the foundation of social connection and something we take for granted.
So we've scientifically proved it's better to give than receive. Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I have one more economics question for you.
Yeah.
When you go up to a Creemee stand and buy a Creemee, what is your Creemee order?
Ooh. I mean, I'd probably get a maple creamy with jimmies.
Jimmies.
Okay. So this is our science experiment. We are trying to trace the origin of jimmies. It's come up a couple times, and we've mostly found it was in Maine and Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But then Justin Marsh told us it was solidly infiltrated Lamoille County.
Yeah.
Even his parents were native Vermonters, and they used the term jimmies.
My mom is from Maine, so that's probably where I got it. She's from like a small fishing town in Maine.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I think I probably got it from her. Yeah.
This is another point for Team Sprinkles.
That as well. All right,
Yep.
we've got a couple data points here.
So,
We've got
yep,
Maine
we're learning a lot.
and sprinkles. Although, do jimmies count
Yes.
as sprinkles?
Yes. If
Are
I
they
have
the
to
same
require
thing?
one day, I'm going to bring in some visual aids. We're going to do some analysis on that.
You know, by the way, I was looking
Now
at
that
the
we're on
chemical
video.
ingredients in sprinkles, and I'm not sure you want to be eating those.
Really? Are they
Yeah.
bad
Can
for
we
you?
just-
They've got wax in them
Just
and all
stop.
kinds of dye.
Andy, nobody needs to know that.
That's sad.
This was going to end on such a happy note with a maple creamy.
I still like my creamies. Yeah.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for being with us today. It was
Thank you so
great.
much for having me.
Thank you.
This
was
fun.
amazing.
Yeah,
Thanks for everything you're
appreciate
doing.
you both.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode.
Thank you all for listening.
Follow us between episodes for the latest updates on our socials at There's No A in Creemee on Instagram, Substack, and Blue Sky.
And catch us on our next episode of There's No A in Creemee, Vermont Politics, Culture, and Beyond in Apple Podcasts and Spotify.